Did you have to return to work and navigate figuring out breastfeeding and pumping and daycare and how to provide enough milk? And perhaps you were even traveling for work and transporting your milk from one place to another? Well, I have the perfect story for you today. Deanna is a working mom of two, and she shares her challenges of returning to work after maternity leave to a very busy job where she traveled extensively. And Deanna has some really great practical tips, both about mindset and about how to navigate being a working mom while providing breast milk for your baby. She also went through several traumatic family events while breastfeeding, and she has a little bit to say about that too and how it impacted her journey. So let's get into it. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having only known a handful of people who had ever done it and only seeing it up close a couple of times, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a childbirth educator, and an internationally board-certified lactation consultant, or an IBCLC. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding struggles and triumphs through the lens of systemic and cultural barriers, so that you know your baby feeding struggles were not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are. Hi, Deanna. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, Lo. How are you?
I'm so good. So we are real life friends, former coworkers. But before we get into your baby feeding stories, why don't you introduce yourself and your family?
So I think a little bit about me is I work full time, and I met Lo at Weight Watchers. So I used to work a full time job and a part time job. And more importantly, I have two beautiful children. My daughter is now 4 and my son is 2, almost 3. So I had them pretty close in age. And I think what they call me is a geriatric parent. Is that what they call an older parent? That's important. And I'm not married, so I have a boyfriend, but we're together. And I'd say fairly easygoing mother. I'd like to think I'm fun, but breastfeeding was super important to me because I think that's what's healthiest for your child personally, but super important is fed is best. But yeah, so that's a little bit about me. What I want to talk about today is in my breastfeeding journey, I had a lot of trials and tribulations from losing both of my parents through this and having some trials in terms of one child wouldn't take a bottle and one child would only do a bottle. So a lot of challenges through that and a lot of learning experiences in terms of how to pump at work or how to pump at home or only pumping. And so really hoping to share that with you guys today.
Yeah. Take me back to before you were a parent and tell me what your exposure to breastfeeding was before it was your turn.
Nothing. So probably my mother, it was just nothing. My mother was a stay-at-home mother and she just breastfed us and just, I guess it just came easy to her. So she never really talked about it. And
Mm.
so when I had my kids, I just thought it was just going to be easy and you just put a kid on your boob and it just worked like that.
Yeah.
So
And did you have friends or family members that you had seen breastfeed?
not really, because my girlfriends all lived in different states and different areas. So when they went through it, one of my girlfriends had 2 children, 2 twins, and they were in the NICU. So I knew she had them very early, so she didn't have that opportunity. And then another girlfriend decided not to do it. So I really didn't have a ton of exposure to it. My older sister did breastfeed, and she had talked about some of the challenges to me. So I did have a little bit of it, but I thought she was maybe being dramatic at the time. You don't understand the extent of it until you yourself go through it, which I guess is true to anything in life. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I talk about this a lot with other guests that it's like a balancing act between telling people the realities of what they could face so that they don't feel alone when they're going through it and instilling fear in
mhm.
somebody about what they might face. It's the same with birth, right? You
Mhm.
don't want somebody to go into the experience feeling fearful. You want them to feel like they can do it. And also, you don't want them to feel like they're the only person who has ever experienced a challenge.
Yeah, that's great.
It's
Very
so
true.
hard.
It
Yeah,
is hard.
yeah. Okay, so you knew you wanted to breastfeed. Did you feel very strongly about it?
I did because I'm also cheap. So I figured this would be the most economical way to go about it. I knew I didn't want to buy all this formula and go about that either. But in the back of my head, looking back, I think of, was it really even cheaper? Because everyone's, oh, you saved all this money on formula. And I'm like, those Willow pumps were $500 and those special bags are insanely expensive. And then I laugh, but all my time is super expensive to think of all those man
Yeah.
hours and pumping and those special cooler bags and carrying around and schlepping all that. And so there's a lot that goes into it that people don't even consider. But
Yeah, that is so true. Our time is not free,
mm-mm.
and it is a labor that we
Mhm.
put into breastfeeding.
And even though work gives you, by law, they have to give you those breaks, which is great, you still have to do your work. I always say to they're like, oh, yeah, but work gives you breaks. Yeah, but at the back end, you still have to figure out how to do your work. It's not really that you still have to make up the time somewhere, I guess is my
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why some of the statistics say that working moms in particular are some of the most efficient workers you can have because they just learn how to figure it out because they've got to get to the
Mhm.
kids to pick them up at daycare and they know they have to get all their work done. So even if you take breastfeeding out of the equation, they're they have a finite amount of time and they have to get it all done. And so they're more efficient when they're at work because they're like, yeah, I'm not going to mess around here. I'm just going to put my head down and get the work done because I have too much on my plate to mess around.
Yeah, and it's so true. I was also in this women's group at work, and I think one of the other pieces that I studied a lot about is why women fall behind at work. And this is so true because you think of all of these things. And so I'm super passionate about helping women not fall behind. But this, unfortunately, is one of the reasons why women fall behind because, unfortunately, breastfeeding and children do take a toll on your career. To your point, Lo, you really do have to be super diligent, even more. But not having those conversations at work, the hallway conversations, those do take a toll on your career, or not going out for
Yes.
drinks still do
Yes.
take a toll on your career.
Absolutely, they do. Yeah. It's a tax. And often it's the women who suffer more than the men.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so you had this plan to breastfeed, and knowing that this is not a birth centered podcast, but also knowing that the way a birth plays out can impact how
Mhm.
breastfeeding starts out. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how breastfeeding got started for you and maybe tell us how your birth experiences might have impacted those initial feeding experiences?
Sure. So I can say fairly lucky. I had, I'll call it a fairly easy childbirth, if there's such a thing. Went into labor 1 day late with my daughter and just, I'll say, just had her. No epidural, and I was able to just start breastfeeding her. So she had no tongue tie, none of that. So thankful for all of that. But I think when we were talking earlier, one of the points I made is just because it's quote unquote easier for some. I had no supply issues, all of that. It doesn't mean it's easy. You're still engorged, you're still trying to figure out the right positions, you're moving the pillow around, right? I still didn't know what the hell I was doing because you've never done it. So
Mhm.
I made my boyfriend and I go to that 3 hour long breastfeeding class. And you don't know what you're doing until you do it. And so you're trying to figure it all out. So this is why it's so important to talk to others. So the lactation consultant comes and I'm surprisingly outgoing, but I really don't want someone squeezing my boob and picking it up and doing all of that. It's
Mhm.
just weird to me. I didn't really want to do all of that, but I'm comfortable talking about it. So it wasn't until I actually talked to you until I learned some things about what a flange was or that there's different kinds of pumps other than what my insurance offered or just those different things like that. So I think that's why it's so important to talk to other people about different products or different things and different solutions like that there's a nipple cream or just things like that. Like I said, it came easier to me, thankfully, but it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination.
No,
So
it's never super easy. Even the easiest experience is usually just to change, just learning how to interact with a human being in a way that you never have before. Even if you have babysat or been a nanny, you've never fed somebody with your breast in their mouth before. So it's a totally new way of interacting with somebody else.
it's weird.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's weird. Yeah, it's different.
Yeah. So then when you had your daughter and you're in the hospital and lactation came to offer support, were you initially interested, and then the way that they interacted with you, you were like, "Yeah, no thanks," or you knew right away that you didn't want any help?
I just said I was good because I thought I got it. I was
Okay.
like, oh no, she's feeding. She had her dirty diapers. So I was like, oh, I'm good. I think I'm good. I got this.
Okay. Good.
And they don't push. They're like, okay. They just
Oh,
leave. They're busy.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm working a couple shifts in a hospital now, and it's interesting because it's very different than private practice, which is slow. You have 90 minutes, you're in somebody's home, and it's a very different pace. But in the hospital, when you're trying to see 10 people in a day, if you walk in and somebody's, "No, I'm good, I've got it," you're like, "Great."
You move on for someone needing you and wanting you to come to
Right.
their home.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm glad that it wasn't because you had a bad experience, but rather that was just your personal preference.
Yeah. Yeah. The lady was sweet and willing, but yeah, definitely personal preference, I think.
Okay, yeah. And did you said you felt some engorgement and it was a little bit strange at first. Did you encounter any other initial frustrations in the beginning, or it was all pretty smooth sailing right
It was
away?
honestly all smooth sailing. Someone was like, "Oh, eat oatmeal, it helps. Drink your water." I felt like I was on a roll, feeling good. And then all of a sudden, I knew I had to go back to work. So I started pumping up my freezer stash, feeling good, and then brought my daughter to daycare for her trial, and she wouldn't take a bottle. So it was all good until then. And at that moment, it was like, oh crap, what do we do? And so you try a different bottle and then you try another bottle. But she didn't want anything but me. And I'll also say too, it puts a lot of stress on you as a mother because everyone's telling you you're doing something wrong. They're like, you need to do something different, or it's because you fed her too much, it's because you did this, or you're nurturing her too much, you're bathing her too much, and it makes you feel inadequate. So then you're trying all these bottles, someone's holding your shirt, then I think it was that everyone else was trying to feed her. And so I like never fed her while we were trying to get her into like in the swing of daycare. So then at that point, we finally got her to take the bottle, and then she did not want to breastfeed at all anymore.
Oh,
I know. I know. So it was so sad. So I had to go to exclusively pumping, which is
no.
really sad because it's like a bond that you're missing. And also, and I don't know if other people experience this, but you're also waking up at night to pump, and then you have to feed the baby, change the baby, and then you have to clean the pump and go through all of that. So it's like a double hit. And so it's really depressing to do all of that. So yeah, that was tragic.
Especially when you had already experienced this fantastic nursing relationship
Yeah.
that was working so well for you. And then because I don't know, if you had more paid time off, would you have taken it, or were you ready to go back?
Oh no, I definitely would have taken it. I
Yeah.
had 12 weeks, which I'm grateful for. And I think I had mentioned to you before, there was also some other challenges. I had some loss in my family, so I did have to travel and step away at the time. And then I started traveling again for work. So that also made me step away from my family. And when you're away from your children, I think emotionally and physically, I felt like I was detached at that point.
Mm.
And it stinks because I felt like I missed that experience after that 3 months with my daughter. And then with my
Mhm.
son, I was like, no, nothing is going to change this. So I was like, I'm gonna start the bottle right away. And, but no one's going to take that kind of bond away from me and him because it really disappointed me. Yeah. And it's twice the work too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can imagine that during that time of loss, when you were feeling so emotional in your personal life, it would have been helpful to have, I know for me, when I was breastfeeding my kids, it was really helpful for me to center myself, to be forced to just sit on the couch
Mm-hmm.
and feed my baby. And there were times for me, I went through some tumultuous times as well when my second was still breastfeeding, some tumultuous family situations. And it really did force me to say, okay, I have to sit, I have to look my child in the eyes, I have to take this moment, no matter what else is going on. We have to do this. And to have that taken away from you because we don't get enough paid leave in the United
Mm-hmm.
States. 12 weeks is the standard, but it's not enough. It's the
Mm-hmm.
lowest of any developed nation. It's not enough. And it's one of the barriers that makes breastfeeding so difficult because you are not the only one who has a baby who refuses a bottle. And then you have to make a big change so that baby will take a bottle.
Yeah, and I think to your point, when you're going through all these tumultuous situations, so I'm sorry to hear that, but when you're going through these, like the one thing that is so bittersweet is you're going through this great loss, but you have this beautiful life in front of you that I
Yeah.
won't say it fixes it because nothing fixes those situations, but it helps, right? So you're like, this is what can bring me back some
Mhm.
happiness and joy, but you can't feel that connection because of the situation. So it's
Yeah.
challenging.
I remember that in your life that you
Yeah.
had new life
Hmm.
springing, you had a baby, and then you also had loss in your life at the same time.
It's
And
tough. But
yeah.
I think one of the other pieces I should mention going through all of this, like in postpartum depression and mental health and all of this. And I will say, I don't think I had postpartum depression, but just going through all of these traumatic events, it's so important to put yourself first. And I know sometimes like doctors are hesitant to put you on medicine, or a lot of women don't take the time they need for themselves because of their children. But that is one thing I'm trying to do even now is it's hard to say, no, I need this for myself, but it's so important to put yourself first. And even before that child, because you're not there and you're not healthy, then it's hard to be healthy for your children. So,
Yes.
yeah.
That is so true.
Mhm.
And it makes us feel more connected to the family when we come back.
Yep. It's tough though. And then you have all that guilt, but it like
Mhm.
ultimately you are a better parent when you do
Mhm.
get that time away. So that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. So what were some of the things that you tried when you were having this bottle crisis?
So we tried different people feeding her. We tried to have her not see me, have different people like wear my shirt. I like to put her in her swing with their bottle because she loved her swing, which I know everyone says don't let them self feed, but she could at that stage hold her own bottle. So of course it was supervised. It eventually the lady at daycare got her with the nuke bottle, but I
Yeah.
think we probably spent $300 in bottles, I swear. We had so many bottles. So that was the winner, but it was
Yeah.
crazy.
And was your daycare, were they patient? Were they understanding of the situation? How long did it take for her to finally take a bottle, and what was their attitude about this while it was happening?
They were great. So she went in for the trial,
Uh-huh.
and that's when we had discovered this that she wouldn't take the bottle. But they were like, if she won't, then you could come in and we have a feeding room, and then you could just feed her and then leave. But the struggle is, I do work remote most of the time outside of traveling in the New England area or at the time Chicago. But anyone who does work remote knows, yeah, you can bring your computer, but daycare was still I think 15 minutes one way. It
Right.
seems great to go in and feed your child unless I sit in the parking lot and work, or it's still a large chunk outside of your day to go in, feed your kid and leave and all of that
Mhm.
stuff. That would have been my option. But so we kept bringing her in for the trials prior to. So I think
Mhm.
those are absolutely critical to make sure that you have those set up if you do have to go to daycare prior to going to work. So making sure you get
Yeah.
those set up before.
And would they have allowed you to try cup feeding or open cup feeding or anything that wasn't a bottle if she had never adapted to the bottle? Were they flexible in that way?
I actually totally forgot about that. We did try that, and we did try spoon feeding, and then also like with the little dropper too, and the mini spoon too, but none of that worked. We
Okay.
also tried like different temperatures too, like warmer, colder to see if like she liked
Uh-huh.
those. But
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. Yeah. So I know Google can be helpful. It can also be overwhelming. So where were you going to try to problem solve? Where were you getting your sources of information?
So I actually went to this breastfeeding like Facebook page, so that I was getting a lot of tips from that. So people were like posting all these ideas, but to your point, they're not super helpful, but people are also super opinionated too. So
Yes.
thankfully, I have like pretty tough, thick skin, so I don't really care. But if you don't, probably stay away or post anonymously, things like that, because people are really mean. They're like I
Yeah.
mentioned before, even my own family was like, "Oh, it's your fault."
Yeah.
Yeah, they need
Yeah.
someone to blame it on.
That can be really hard, and some daycares are not willing to do the open cup feeding or the spoon or the syringe. Sometimes they are very unwilling to be creative in their problem solving. So I'm glad to hear that the place that you were going to was willing to think outside the box, even though it didn't end up working.
Yeah.
Those because sometimes those solutions do work, but it really is a shame that you ended up having to go fully to exclusively pumping instead of feeding directly from your breast, because for some people, they love exclusively pumping and they prefer it, and I've interviewed people who do prefer it, but that's not what you wanted to do. And so how long did you end up doing that?
So I had a goal of 12 months because that's when we could offer milk. I think I made it to 11 and a half months. And the good thing is I had enough in the freezer to last us till 12, which is funny. I think it was like a little bit short of 12, but we were like stretching it. I don't know why, like doing half and making all these concoctions to get us there, putting a little water in. But I don't know why, because in your head, you think on that like literally that day, like the
It's
1
like
year mark, all of a sudden they could just miraculously have milk, but it's not like that. But I don't know why they make you think that at the doctor, but that's what
right,
we did.
like a magical day.
Yes. And all of a
But
sudden,
it's
the
yes.
day they can have milk, but
Yeah, suddenly their digestive system
it's perfect.
changes.
Fine. So I don't know. It's these crazy thoughts in your head.
Yeah, that's funny. And we've all been there.
And I should mention too, I know we were talking about this earlier too, but I set that goal. I'm a very goal oriented person, but I was proud of myself for making it relatively close to my goal. But I talk about this with my sister as well too, because she had made it to her goal as well too. But there is no trophy when you get there, which is really disappointing. And I noticed as well too, the people that you would think would be super proud of you really don't care, which some people are. They're like, great. It's not really that exciting for others, which I don't blame them, right? It's not that great.
Yeah.
It's you and your child.
It
But so I guess the point is, and we were talking about this earlier, but there's going to be many points when you want to quit because ultimately you're in pain or there's annoying moments where you like forget a piece of your pump, or again, it's just you have those moments where you're just busy and you can't take that time away, or just any reason that you could think of. And just know at those moments that it is worth it. And even though there is no trophy, that it's something to be proud of and no one could ever take it away from you.
exactly. Yeah, it is something to be proud of. It really is. It's a huge accomplishment, especially given all the barriers we face to feed our
Thanks.
babies from our own bodies. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. I I found that when there were, like, just the 1 or 2 people who knew what it was like, that if I said to them, "Hey, I just reached however many months," or "I just reached a year," or to me, I ended up feeding for years, like, I could reach out to them and they would be like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing." And then you get that little dopamine hit that
Yep.
you might be looking for sometimes.
When you told me, I almost fell over. I'm like, how the hell? You're literally like the gold standard. I couldn't even believe it. I'm like, as soon as I saw that, like I said, that year mark rolled around, I'm like, all right, girlfriend, let's wrap it up. We're almost done. Like we're closing up shop.
I know a lot of people like that. I know a lot of people who are like, as soon as they get teeth,
Yeah, it's over.
My good friend Gretchen was like, as soon as they could start talking to me, that's it.
It's
No
getting weird.
more. Yeah, so I know we all have our own sensibilities
Mhm.
around it, and I have no expectations for anybody else about what their sensibilities are.
I say that too. Whatever you could do, I'm very open to all of that. Whatever you could do is great. So, even
Right.
2 days of it,
Yes.
even if you don't want to, I can understand why.
Exactly. Yeah. I actually just recorded a video with a guest who was on my podcast who is a sleep consultant. And we recorded a video yesterday about making bite sized goals for breastfeeding or sleep. And one of the things I talked about is if you're not sure, your first bite sized goal can be I am just going to feed my baby colostrum.
Yeah.
If my baby can at least get colostrum, that's amazing. It's highly nutritious. It's
Yep.
really good for them. And if you're feeding your baby colostrum and it's, hey, I think I could keep going, then great, make your
Right.
next goal. I'm just going to feed my baby while I'm on maternity leave and I'm
Mhm.
going to see how it goes from there. Then great, that's your next bite-sized goal. So you don't have to have some huge goal. You can just see how it goes and create each next goal.
Yeah, I love that idea too. I know we, in our past world, we used to talk a lot about just breaking down goals as well too. Sometimes it's just one day at a time is all you can think
Yeah,
about, or just even the
exactly.
next hour. Some days just getting through.
Right, yeah, and then not quitting at your very worst moment.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, when it doesn't look good.
but you could take a break, right? You could be like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I'm gonna pump this one,"
But I
or
think actually to that point, and maybe you can actually share some tips on this one. I think sometimes it does get challenging. Like you'll see lows here, and I struggled with this at some points with my son. My supply really dipped at one point, and I was really
Mm,
aggravated because I really did. I think I stopped with my son at about 8 months, but I had
mhm,
a lot of milk to make it through. Again, doing my formula, I think at around 11 months we were really stretching it there, but I was really struggling. And so I was drinking my water, eat my oatmeal, and nothing was working, eating that nasty nutritional yeast and all those weird things. I shouldn't say weird, but all those things people on the internet tell you and pumping more, but nothing was working. And so
huh.
at times it's just challenging. And I think your body's just done because in my case, I think it was stress and just being tired and all of these things. At times you just can't. And I think it's important to pay attention to the signs to realize like you're trying your best, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. Yeah, I don't know if you have any advice there, but
I think what you said is perfect, that we have to recognize when we are doing our best. And with each individual person, I could help them problem solve and say, okay, so what is your goal? Do you want to try to increase your milk supply? Do you want to be happy with where you are? Like, what is it that you want to do in this situation? Because sometimes people just need the permission to say, you know what? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. So I can just do the best that I can do. Or sometimes it's something simple. Oh, actually, let's change out your parts on your pump, or let's make sure your phalanges are still fitting correctly because sometimes they change, and then once you get the right sizes, your supply will increase at the pump. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's things like that people don't necessarily think of. And so if you have a consult with a knowledgeable IBCLC, you might be able to get your supply increased. But sometimes, like you're saying, we don't get enough time off. And so if you're stressed, if you're
Mhm.
traveling a lot for work, if you're away from your kids a lot, supply is very hormonal. And so
Yeah.
if you have stress hormones that are coursing through your body, that is going to interfere with your milk making and your milk releasing hormones. And so there's only so much you can do to counteract that. We can't tell our bodies stop stressing.
But that's all wonderful things. I was also thinking too, if I did reach out to someone at the time, maybe it would have been different because to your
Mhm.
point, I'm not a professional. I don't know how to troubleshoot. You think you know what you're doing on your second kid, but you
Yeah.
really don't.
Yeah, I mean, you do. I always tell people that they are the experts of their body and their babies. And so I like to empower people to
Mhm.
feel that. And I'm the expert on all things hormonal when it comes to lactation, breastfeeding, positions, pumping. And so I like to kind of put our expertise together.
Mhm.
And I can't do my job without your expertise. You can definitely do your job without mine. But sometimes if somebody is at a place where they're stuck, yeah, they can bring in the expert to help them.
It
So,
enhances it too. So
yeah.
it's a good partnership. So
Do you need a partner to help you through your lactation struggles, whatever they may be? I would love to be the person who partners with you to help you overcome your breastfeeding or chest feeding challenges. And in many cases, you can even get your insurance to pay for our visits, whether they be virtually from all across the country or in person if you live nearby. You can find all of my information, including how you can get your insurance to pay for our visits, at www.quabbinbirthservices.com. Before we get into your second experience, I do want to hear a little bit about what traveling was like. But I don't know if you want to share about your second experience and then talk about traveling as it relates to both of your kids, or if you think it makes more sense to talk about traveling when it came to your first and then traveling when it came to your second.
I'll just
Make
say
some of
my son, I'm a type A person. It looked no different than my daughter. I just literally, he was one day late, went to the It's funny, both of my children were the same weight,
Oh
the
my
same
gosh.
length. They were born almost the same time. It's funny. I know. Could I be any more boring and routine? And so the good thing is that my son was born like peak COVID. So
Oh.
I went to the hospital and I had to wear a mask, which was super annoying for anyone who has had a baby. They know you need to breathe. And thankfully the nurse let me take it off, but they wanted you in and out. So I had Vinny at I think like 6:30 something at night, and I was out by 11 the next morning.
Oh my gosh.
So it was great. I
Yeah.
know, in and out, no one can visit you, which is great because you don't want anyone in the hospital visiting you. You just want to go home. So it was wonderful because then I could get back to my daughter and all that, the animals and all that good stuff. Like I said, nothing really super exciting there. The only, I think, harder thing is breastfeeding with your second, is that you have the first little kid running around that you have to worry about. So it's challenging, which I'm sure you could maybe attest to, is that you can't really just sit there and it's not really your relaxing time with my son. It's okay, Cora, go away, or no, give me a moment. But at the time she was only 18 months. So she was
Mm,
a baby herself and didn't really understand that it wasn't all about her anymore. So
mm.
it's challenging at that moment. But yeah,
Yeah, that's not a very wide gap. So you really, and you can't just leave them be when they're at 18 months. You
no.
really have to monitor.
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes I think it was really stupid to do that, but because I was older, I was like, I got to get this done. I felt that pressure. And then other times I'm like, thank goodness that it's just like over the diaper stage and all of that good stuff. I don't know. To each their own. Some people might say it's crazy, other people might say it's good, but I don't know. I'll let you know in about 20 years.
I know, right? It's
We'll
all a
see.
grand experiment.
Yeah. So, yeah, so it is tough with a little one but yeah, so I had got to enjoy some time with Vinny. And then with him, I was found not to make the same mistakes with Cora. We introduced the bottle earlier and we're doing more of the bottle, the bottle breast. But yeah, so that we were flipping on and off. And he went to daycare already okay with the bottle there. But because I worked, I still had to pump and all of that. And then when he got home, I just tried to breastfeed at that point. So yeah, so it was a little bit better of an experience with him. Like I said, around 8 months, because at that point I had some challenges now with my dad and some personal things that, like I said, I think my body just shut down
Mm.
at that point. And I tried to, at that point, put myself first and just say, I think I tried everything. I think it was it at that point. But like I said, I had a freezer stash at that point. So I was thankful for that. But I would say, I don't know if I recommend the freezer stash situation. Again, back to the money situation. We actually bought a whole freezer just for this breast milk. And I was so obsessed with it. And at one point we lost it. And so you become like super possessive of your breast milk. It's crazy. I know. Like someone left the door open on the garage fridge. I thought I was going to kill someone. But you become like angry or rotate the dates, or even in the fridge, you're like, why didn't you use that milk first? Because now I have to throw it away. So, you really have to educate everyone else,
Right.
your daycare providers, people in your house, that what the rules are of breast milk too, which sounds,
Because you're working so hard for it.
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
So,
nobody else is working that hard. So you have to
no.
really make sure they all get it.
seems easy, but it's not. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So how much milk did you lose?
I felt like it was like 40 bags at the time of a variety of different ounces. I know, and I think the rule is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is as long as it still has crystals and is frozen, you can resalvage that. And to your tips about flying, if you're flying and it's liquid, they can test it. So make sure that it's frozen before you fly. But it's challenging because in the hotels, they have those little freezers. So they don't really have tons of freezer space. So you become like this obnoxious mother where you're like, excuse me, can you put this in the freezer? But you have to
Mhm.
trust the hotel staff that they're going to do it and then be able to go get it for you. And you do have to consider all of this in terms of like time and trust other people and where are they going to put it in the freezer. And you got to carry this around through the airports and making sure you have a freezer bag or a cooler with you. And I never wanted to check it in because you don't want to lose it. So you got to carry it through security. And so all of these just things are an extra hassle, but you can carry a cooler or a cooler bag with you and your pump with you as an extra bag because it's considered a medical device on airplane. So that's good to know when you're traveling.
Oh.
And I know the company I'm working with now, they do offer free milk services. So they will ship your milk for you, which is great. I loved that. So you didn't have to carry home your frozen milk. They'd actually ship it for you for free. And FedEx does offer that service as well too. So it is costly if you have to pay for it though, but I think the most important thing is make sure you talk with your HR partners to see what your company offers in terms of like breaks or pumping rooms, all that good stuff, shipping policies.
Yeah. And so when you were traveling, were you able to book your hotel rooms, like which hotel chains you stayed in or
Mhm.
okay. So could you try to book based on could you get a kitchenette so that it had a fridge and freezer in the hotel room?
Yeah. And
Okay.
most of the time too, like I will say hotels are super accommodating. Anytime if they didn't have those capabilities, I always say, can you just put this in your main freezer and would you bring it out to me? This they would. So they're really great about all those types of things too. So I think
Yeah.
it's just asking for help if you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't be afraid to. And then when you were traveling for work, was this usually to go to conferences, to have meetings? And in that case, did you have to make sure everybody knew that you needed your time for pumping? How did that work?
Yeah, so it'd be different things. So sometimes I'd have to go to the corporate office or sometimes I'd have meetings. And I was open about it. And a lot of times my male coworkers would laugh about it. So I worked in a primarily male dominated industry for my full time jobs. They would feel sometimes uncomfortable about it. And at times I would go in the pumping room and get away from them. But at other times I would feel like really overwhelmed, have a lot to do. So I'd wear my Willow pumps, which are the portable pumps, and I'd laugh because I'd be in a meeting and you could see like the little lights and they'd make this sound like and I don't
Uh-huh.
care. You get to the point where you're like, listen, I don't care. So I just wear them right to the meeting and they would feel uncomfortable, but I'm like, I don't care. Get over it. You guys have kids. I'm sure you've been through this with your wives before or your partners before. You're going to have to deal with it. And so,
I love that because we are mammals.
mhm,
When are we just going to acknowledge that we are mammals?
yep.
I think about I one of my favorite internet buddies, her name is Francie Webb, and she has this platform called Go Milk Yourself, where she teaches people how to hand express, amongst other things, but that's one of the things she does. And right on her videos, she will show people like the best ways to move milk and be able to hand express. And then she teaches hand expression classes where in these private videos, not right on the internet, but in these private videos, she will show people with her own breasts how to hand express. And I was thinking about how when I go into the hospitals or when I'm dealing with clients, I will often touch myself too,
Mhm.
not lift up my shirt or
Yeah, but
anything,
at
but
least show
just
that.
on the outside of my clothing. And I was thinking about how if we go to a farm and like a farmer is showing how they milk a cow,
It's
they're just like,
fine.
yeah, this is how you do it because
Mhm,
cows are mammals and we're not grossed out by cow's milk.
right.
So why is it that suddenly, because it's coming from a human body, it
It's weird.
becomes disgusting?
Yeah. It
We
is
just
true. To that point, like, I'd put my milk in, like, the fridge at work, and people would be like, "Oh, don't drink the milk, it's breast milk," and there's all, like, these weird connotations about it. I'm like, "Girl, these are, like, 50-year-old men, like, joking about it." I'm like, shut up. Oh, go ahead, put in
right,
your coffee creamer, but I actually don't
right,
because I need it. But and then they like make jokes like they if we go out to dinner after, they'd be like, "Oh, Deanna needs a seat for her bag." I'm like, "Yeah, I do actually," because
right,
it's then it got to the point where I'm like, "Oh, can you actually carry it?" Because I'm sick of it schlepping around this bag. But it's all this stuff
right.
you don't think about, or even before you go to a social event, they're like, "Oh, Deanna needs 20 minutes to go pump." I'm like, "Yeah, I do." So you do have to ask for what you need because I didn't want to bring the pumps out. So unfortunately, it's just part of you need to ask for what you need in all these events. And it is a pain in the butt, but it's reality of what we have to do. And so you have
Yeah,
to tell them what you need, I guess, is what
right.
I'm saying.
We are propagating the human
In life. Yeah.
right, we are propagating humans, and we are keeping them alive, and we are keeping the economy going.
But answer your point, we should have had more time off. So I wouldn't
Right,
be being obnoxious if I could have had more
I
time off.
know,
But
I
I'd like to
know.
be home too.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so great tips about traveling, that you get the extra bag, that it is true that as long as there are still crystals in the breast milk, it's totally fine, and you can take a cooler through the airport so that it can stay frozen while you're traveling. And I did know that some companies offer this milk shipping service because they would rather have you working
Hmm.
and being
Yep.
productive than have to pay for your maternity leave. Check with HR. And sometimes if they don't offer it, it might be something that they will be willing to offer, especially if you travel a lot for work.
Yeah. And I think maybe just the last tip too is I would do some car travel too. It's not as easy in the car, which is weird because there's no kitchenette in the car, or a lot of the rest stops aren't as clean. You can't like just go to your hotel room and stuff. So it is a challenge in the car too. To your point, you could just put your pump or the pieces in a plastic bag, and then I would rinse them and just put them in a plastic bag, and then that way you can wash them when you get home. But you do have to consider having the plastic bag or having all this stuff on the go when you're around. But it's funny because thankfully I have a pickup truck, and there's actually that cord where you can plug it in your truck if you
Oh,
don't have
yeah.
the portable pump. But you do have to think about all these things if your car doesn't have just the normal plug-in feature. Just things to think about if you're on the road a lot.
Yeah, that's true. And did you have a favorite wearable pump?
I used the Willow, so I didn't really have a exposure to a lot of them,
Okay.
but so I can't say if I had a favorite or not, but I will say the bags were really expensive. I don't know that I would recommend that or not, and they were really hard to like pour out of the Willow, and you had to use the bag. There wasn't like a container that you could use to pour into a bottle. So I think
Mm.
I've seen some other ones and some maybe innovations since that time. I think it was like one of the first on the market. Not for or against it, but I think there's been some new coming since my day.
Yeah, great. Okay. You made it to about 8 months with your son, with both pumping and feeding. Did you have to have a weaning time in order to not feel engorged, or by that time your supply was low enough that you were able to just stop?
I just stopped. So to your
Uh-huh.
point, it was just so low. I just pumped once a day and then it was just none. So
Mhm.
that was just
Mhm.
my weaning time. But
Okay.
basically just it was over,
Uh-huh.
unfortunately.
And did it feel anticlimactic at all?
Yeah, because there wasn't like a last time, so to speak. But that's okay.
Yeah. And do you have a favorite memory of breastfeeding with either of your children that you will, when you're an old lady in the nursing home, that you think will stick with you?
I think maybe just sitting in this chair at my old house, just like looking outside and just looking at the sunset and being able to just hold my son and just like looking out the window and just sitting there because it is relaxing. It gets to a point where it wasn't painful and it wasn't a nuisance sometimes. Like when he got home from daycare and it was like later in the evening. And so you could just look
Mhm.
at the sunlight and just sit there and have a few minutes to yourself of just peace. I think you mentioned to your point where like you can think, maybe when they're like 3 or 4 months old where they're not like moving all over and you are both in the flow. So
Yeah.
not pulling your
Yeah.
hair type of thing at that point yet. No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And did you talk about everything that you wanted to get across about your story? Was there anything else that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I think that was it. I think just thank you so much for letting me share my story. And more importantly, thank you, Lo, for all the work that you do to help everybody. You're really such a positive influence, I think, on just talking about birthing and lactation. So thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, of
Really
course.
helped me as well.
Yeah, and your story is one I think that is so important because you've always been an incredibly hard worker and it didn't stop once you had kids and you were able to maintain your focus on working but also step into your role as a mother and embrace that role and do both. And from the outside looking in, it looks like you're doing both gracefully, and to be able to share how you were able to manage even with the challenges of both working and breastfeeding is so important because so many people, once they get started, it just seems so overwhelming to think about it all.
Thanks. That's incredibly kind because although most people look like they have it together, they don't. So don't worry. So I
Right.
think that's important for most people to know. No one has it together, but thank you.
Yeah. Good point.
It's
Awesome.
all a facade. Smoke and mirrors. No, but thank you.
Thank you
I
so much.
shouldn't say that. Thank you.
Whether you are dealing with a bottle refusal from your baby or breast refusal, or whether you are navigating people who just don't understand how to normalize human milk feeding at work, there are communities of people who are here to stand beside you and help you. And one of those communities is the Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. This is a place where both those who are making human milk and the people who support them, doulas, peer counselors, fellow IBCLCs, and others who are interested in making a more equitable experience for human milk making, discuss the barriers that got in the way of making feeding our babies as stress-free as possible. So if this sounds like a community you are interested in contributing to so that human milk making becomes more and more equitable over time, please come join us over on the Milk Making Minutes community group. I would love to have your input there. And if you know a working mom or somebody who is about to be a working mom, please share this episode with them. It goes a long way in helping me reach the people who could benefit from the Milk Making Minutes. Thanks. Bye.